There is a great difference between comprehending the knowledge of things and tasting the hidden life of them.
All right. We are reading the Gospel according to Mark. I think we finished chapter 4. Does that sound right? Where Jesus stills the storm. So we will begin with chapter 5, verse 1. And this is regarding the Gerasene demoniac. I should say, are there any questions on the last passages that we read before we go on?
I was just reading Psalms this morning, and I forget which one it was, 108 or 109, something like that. But it talks about the Lord calming the sea and then coming to the destination. And it just, jumped out to me as a pre-statement of what Jesus did what we just read in last chapter.
Right. Okay, good observation. And just before that, it talks about the use of parables, these comparisons as we go on. It's interesting, we have so many of these comparisons, these parables in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, but not in the Gospel according to John. It's a very different kind of perspective there. Okay, so let's continue here. They came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gerasenes. When he had stepped out of the boat, immediately a man out of the tombs with an unclean spirit met him. He lived among the tombs, and no one could restrain him anymore, even with a chain. For he had often been restrained with shackles and chains, but the chains he wrenched apart, and the shackles he broke in pieces, and no one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always howling and bruising himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and bowed down before him, and he shouted at the top of his voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For he had said to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." He begged him earnestly not to send them out of the country. Now there on the hillside a great herd of swine was feeding, and the unclean spirit begged him, "Send us into the swine, let us enter them." So he gave them permission, and the unclean spirits came out and entered the swine. And the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea and were drowned in the sea. Now, I mentioned, I think here last time, the word that we get translated as sea is the Greek word thalassa, which basically means any large body of water, whether it's a sea, ocean, lake, just not a small pond, basically. And as I had said, at that time, the sea was not looked at as something peaceful, but as a kind of dangerous place with all the storms that could destroy ships and kill people and sailors.
Henry, what does the Hebrew call what's called the Sea of Galilee? What do they call the body of water?
Oh, I don't have that on the tip of my tongue at the moment.
I don't remember ever seeing it in the Old Testament.
If you wait 1 second, I think I know where I can find it quickly. Okay, I just have a little Bible dictionary here, and there's a possibility it may tell what what it says here, the sea. The Hebrews so designated any large body of water, whether lake, river, sea, or ocean. Okay, it's also known as the Sea of Tiberias, and I think it's also Gennesaret. Does that sound familiar to anyone?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I think that's it. Let me just take a quick look here. I gather in Hebrew it's the Sea of Kinnereth, all right? That's the Hebrew. So it's also known as the Sea of Galilee. Of course, Galilee is on the west bank of the sea. And it is also the lake of Gennesaret, Sea of Tiberias. Okay? I'm assuming this gentleman had some really serious psychological issues. It sounds like a particular syndrome or anything. Would Conrad or Jack know?
Nothing specific that comes to mind, but the psychiatrist would have to answer that question.
Right. Okay. This is also a very interesting story because this is about one of the few places in the New Testament where you get a lot of humor. I don't know if that's apparent to anybody.
Yeah.
In verse 9, then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." Well, legion, this Greek word, which gets translated as legion, but the legion was the Roman legion. It's an indirect reference to the Romans, the oppressing Roman government. And he's saying there's a legion in him. That is, the Roman army was, something to be really feared, something that was really scary to any population anywhere. Their name is Legion. There's a lot of very wry humor here by calling these evil spirits in him Legion. And that wouldn't be missed by the hearers of this story. Likewise, of all things, where does Jesus send these evil spirits? Into swine. And of course, for a good Jew, swine were not your favorite animal whatsoever. So there's a real humor there. And of course, the swine end up going into the sea and drowning.
Why would they be raising swine there anyway if it were a
Well,
Jewish...
this isn't where he's on the other side of the lake. This is not Israel.
Yeah, it's on the east side.
On the east side.
The
We're
east
outside
side,
of...
the east side today is the Golden Heights. And
Yeah.
not too far from the Golden Heights is modern day Syria.
Yeah.
I think this part of the world at that time was called the Decapolis.
Right. And
Which means-
there is a steep place there where the swine supposedly ran down into the sea.
Decapolis means 4 cities in Greek. I'm sorry, 10 cities, Decapolis. Yeah. So this is kind of an interesting story, and I could just see this story being read perhaps in some small church house to a congregation of 10 or 20 people, Jewish Christians, and they all are laughing at what they're hearing here. So we kind of miss that. This is one of the few places where you do find that sort of humor. Anything else there? I don't know in this case in verse 13, numbers so often mean something other than being a real actual number. 2,000. If you think of 2,000 as 2 times 1,000, 1,000 can just be used in a allegorical sense as meaning lots and lots, like gazillions. And 2, or whatever number you have there, might refer to something else. I don't see what the connection would be here, but it's very hard to imagine having 2,000 pigs in one place there. So I suspect that there's some other meaning here that probably is lost to us, but that they would have understood. Okay? All right. Any comments? Any further comments? All right, let's go on to verse 14. The swine ran off and told it in the city and in the country. Then people came to see what it was that had happened. They came to Jesus and saw the demoniac sitting there, clothed and in his right mind, the very man who had had the legion, and they were afraid. Those who had seen what had happened to the demoniac and to the swine reported it. Then they began to beg Jesus to leave their neighborhood. And as he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed by demons begged him that he might be with him. But Jesus refused and said to him, "Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and what mercy he has shown you." And he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him. And everyone was amazed.
So I have 2 questions. The first one, I'm seeing in my footnotes that this is back at the former section, that this destroyed the spirits. That the spirits were actually destroyed by being put into the swine and then into the sea. I would have thought spirits could survive that, but
Well, I think you're taking it very literally then.
okay.
Again, in what's the verse? I'm looking for something here. Verse 18, the demons. I think we often collapse what a demon is with what a devil is, and that may not be quite exactly the same thing. A demon is like, well, we could talk maybe about a demon being alcohol, or a demon being cigarettes or drugs. And what Jesus has done is gotten rid of that kind of spirit out of this poor man that was making him some kind of a psychopath of some sort. Everyone was afraid of him.
Oh yeah,
And,
I was taking that literally.
and you know, and of course, like I said, there's a lot of humor here by calling these spirits legion, because there's so many in him, and at the same time, it's a little jab at the occupying Roman army.
So the other thing is, would this person have been Jewish? Because you just said this wasn't a Jewish area. So was he Jewish?
It doesn't say that here. I don't think we can say either way. Probably not, but I can't say. Okay,
Thank you.
let's continue on to the next section. Actually, there are a couple of stories here. When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered round him, and he was by the sea. Then one of the leaders of the synagogue, named Jairus, came, and when he saw him, fell at his feet and begged him repeatedly, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, so that she may be made well and live." So he went with him. And a large crowd followed him and pressed in on him. Now there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. She had endured much under many physicians and had spent all that she had, and she was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. For she said, "If I but touch his clothes, I will be made well." Immediately her hemorrhage stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Immediately aware that power had gone forth from him, Jesus turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing in on you? How can you say, 'Who touched me?'" He looked all around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, fell down before him, and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." Well, this woman was suffering from some kind of vaginal bleeding for 12 years, which basically made her ritually unclean. And for her to touch someone, especially another man, would make him also unclean, ritually unclean, and he would have to be purified of that contact with her. And she did this without, just did it quietly on her own. But Jesus was aware of something happening with what she did to him. What is the most interesting phrase here is in verse 34. I'm going to just give you the Greek. Now this we have here, "Your faith has saved you." Now, pistis, the P-I-S-T-S, as I may have said last week, is the Greek word that most often gets translated as faith or belief. But really, the basic meaning of the word is trust or confidence. And the literal word order here is the faith of you. So it's your faith, your trust. And then comes the verb sesoken, which is an aorist, it's a past tense, which gets translated often as has saved. And then the final word se is you. Your faith has saved you. Now, we can also translate this word, this verb sesoken. The basic meaning of the word is to heal. So if you could say your faith has saved you, but a good translation also is your trust, your confidence in me healing you has healed you, when Jesus says this. So your trust has healed you. Your total trust in me has healed you. So you get both meanings in this sentence, a more physical meaning and then a spiritual healing as well as physical. And I've always found this phrase very interesting. And if you look at different translations, you'll see they translate it one way or the other. Any questions on that?
You know, I'm in the King James, Henry, it says that back in verse 30 that he says virtue had gone out of him. And you know that the word power is maybe a more correct translation in the normal sense. But when we think that, as you're saying, what went from Jesus to her was something that was a spiritual cleansing or healing, to me, virtue fits better. Virtue meaning something that is pure and holy and good.
Okay, I think virtue would be the correct translation in King James time. The basic meaning of this word is power in today's sense, but it has other meanings as well. This word means power, strength, active power, the power referring to God in terms of when it refers to God as the power. Also means ability, capacity, means, can also mean meaning or significance. I think virtue, as it was used 300 years ago, 400 years ago, had that kind of sense also. The verb of the verb made with the same root here means I am able, to be able, or can, I can. But getting back to he pistis su sesso kense, so often we might be just reading something that sounds very physical, where we need to think of the spiritual sense, as in this particular sentence, it's clear you get two, both of them, inward and outward. So I just want to emphasize that when you look at this particular sentence. All right?
So how much of this are we supposed to take allegorically? So are we supposed to think that perhaps the man in the tombs wasn't actually literally wandering around chewing on himself, and that this woman wasn't actually literally hemorrhaging?
Okay, I can just speak personally here. I think what we're reading right here regarding this woman is an actual true event that happened. As it said, regarding the man in the tombs, I have a feeling that there was kind of a variation put in the words to express something there, that even over psychological issues, the divine power in Jesus was so great that he had control over those demons as well. So whether that happened exactly literally as it is stated, or there was some variation, again, I'm thinking of the humor here. And the speakers of Greek, the Jewish Christians and the other Christians, would have gotten a different meaning than we can if we just read this literally. That's why I always like the injunction from early friends to look for the spiritual significance. Don't get caught up always on whether something is literal or not. We may or may not be able to decide that. And I think sometimes it doesn't really matter. Clearly, Jesus was a worker of real miracles, real physical, extraordinary healings. That's very clear throughout all the Gospels. But whether something happened exactly as it stated there, as you look right now in this one regarding this poor man, I don't know myself. It doesn't shake my own faith at all, whether there was some variation as to what really happened there in terms of how it's stated here.
Oh, no, I wouldn't think it would shake one's faith.
I'm also saying this, I probably will get into this at some other point in the future, that looking at how early Christians sometimes discussed some of these parables and miracles, it sounds very different than how we today would look at them. Again, maybe more as a mixture of allegorical understanding and a true literal meaning there too.
Yeah, I believe the Bible, there are a lot of things in there that there are many layers. The wording and the stories are for more than just what happened. And I can imagine a person who does have problems with their physical and mental instability reading that story and going to the spiritual Christ because of the understanding that Jesus has healed them and that he's alive today and can do the same.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Yeah.
Any other comments on that?
She did not ask for Jesus's help. She just touched his garments.
Yes.
And that is kind of interesting.
She was so certain that perhaps from what she had heard about him and how he may have healed other people that she knew about or had heard about, that he could do it for her too.
But then what I wonder is clearly she didn't feel like she could ask him.
Well, again, the problem that she's ritually impure, unclean.
She could have asked him from a
She shouldn't even be there in the crowd with these other people.
Exactly. Everyone who touched her accidentally was unclean, although not knowing it.
I mean, it's like she's got the coronavirus, you know?
Yeah.
And here she is, and everyone's touching her and him and everybody else. It's a crowd, you know? That was not kosher whatsoever.
Would it have been unclean for another woman to touch her, though?
I think so, too.
Yeah, I think so.
Vis-a-vis everyone, not just men. Okay.
No, not just men.
No.
As far as I know, no man would touch a strange woman in the Jewish culture at that time.
Right.
At all.
I was just wondering because menstruating women were supposed to be around other women, but not around men. So I didn't know if this would count as that or as something extra hideous that would mean that she couldn't be around any sort of humans.
Well, it would not be normal even for a man and a strange woman to be talking to each other whatsoever. That
Right.
just didn't happen. You didn't do that sort of thing. There's a story in the Gospel according to John in chapter 4 or 5 about the Samaritan woman, where he goes up and asks her for a drink of some water from the well. But you didn't do that. You wouldn't go to a strange woman and ask her to get him a drink from the well. That just wasn't done. I mean, if it were a relative, that'd be different, but no.
Yeah, and the Samaritan woman
Was a Samaritan.
surprised too.
Right.
Yeah, you know, she's a half-breed, half-Jewish, which was just something, so you just wouldn't talk to Samaritans at all anyway. She's got two strikes against her, and that is the Samaritan woman. Okay, anything else? So we finish the story here. This is verse 35. While he was still speaking, some people came from the leader's house to say, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the leader of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." He allowed no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the house of the leader of the synagogue, he saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. When he had entered, he said to them, "Why do you make a commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. Then he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, get up." And immediately the girl got up and began to walk about. She was 12 years of age. At this, they were overcome with amazement. He strictly ordered them that no one should know this and told them to give her something to eat. In verse 36, we have this expression here. It says, "Do not be afraid." May is not. Phobu is, we know the word phobia, fear. That's do not be afraid. That's the imperative form. Do not be afraid. Monon, that means only. Pistoa, that's the same root as up above we had pistis. This is the verb to believe, but only believe. But what he's really saying, don't be afraid. Just have trust. Just have confidence. It's hard to imagine what you would mean if you say only believe. But what he's really saying to the synagogue leader is, have confidence in what I'm about to do, that I can do it. Again, this word pistis and the verb pisteo. Here it's an imperative form. Don't be afraid, only have trust, have confidence. Again, this is putting our trust into Christ Jesus, into God the Father. Even a little faith with a little trust, we can move mountains, as Jesus said. Okay, any questions there? In verse 41, we have that expression, Talitha cum, which
Yeah,
gets...
I have a question.
Sure.
Often Jesus, when he did a miracle, would say, don't tell anybody. And why was that?
It's interesting that that's frequently the case here in this gospel according to Mark, that he doesn't want people to just be paying attention to the healings, these miraculous healings, that he really wants them to focus on something different, that truly the healings can say something about Jesus, but that we need to go beyond just being aware of that divine power in him, that same divine power that is in Christ in us, if we are open to realizing and being aware of that same divine spirit in us. Of course, the focus then becomes on our need to be pure and holy temples of the Holy Spirit, because you can't have a defiled temple. And if we are temples of the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of Christ, then we must be pure and holy and not worldly and sinful. So I think that is perhaps one of the reasons, and I say only one of the reasons, why Jesus doesn't want to have people just think of him as this miracle worker, that it's really listening to his word, obeying what he says about the need for us to transform ourselves to become holy as God the Father is holy, which is a command both in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. I don't know if that answers thy question or not, but that's my understanding.
All right. Well, the people generally ignored his request that they not tell anybody. That was generally
Yeah.
ignored.
They're just overwhelmed by what had happened to them. And I think we can understand that human kind of response. It's just too much to keep it quiet. Okay, shall we go on?
Okay.
Okay, chapter 6, verse 1. He left that place and came to his hometown. Where's his hometown?
Capernaum.
Capernaum is where he lived, but he's from Nazareth, right?
Nazareth.
Yeah. Maybe I should say something about that word, hometown. Yeah. That's the word patris. Patris is the word for fatherland. You know, the Greek word for father is Pater, with a long mark over it. And patris is fatherland. So that's where he's from Nazareth, his hometown. But actually, where he is living is in Capernaum on the Sea of Galilee, right on the water there. He left that place and came to his hometown, and his disciples followed him. On the Sabbath, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who had heard him were astounded. They said, "Where did this man get all this? What is this wisdom that has been given to him? What deeds of power are being done by his hands? Is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary, and brother of James and Joses, and Judas and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us?" And they took offense at him. Then Jesus said to them, "Prophets are not without honor except in their hometown, and among their own kin, and in their own house." And he could do no deed of power there, except that he laid his hands on a few sick people and cured them. And he was amazed at their unbelief. In verse 3, my translation has carpenter, and probably a lot of people are familiar with that as being what Jesus was. The Greek word is tekton, and that basically is more than a carpenter. It's a craftsman. So it's a carpenter, but he would do work in wood and stone and similar kinds of materials. Most often, I think in most translations, say carpenter, or do they say something like a craftsman or something else?
Carpenter.
Carpenter. Let me just check to see if there's any other translation for that word.
I've heard other speakers or informed people, though, translate it as you're saying, Henry, builder or
Yes.
contractor, something like that.
Yeah, I have here a wood craftsman, a carpenter. So, I mean, it's just not a carpenter. It's a bit more than that. So he would be building things, but not just houses or
Yeah.
barns.
The place that I look up says a worker in wood, a carpenter, joiner, builder, but also another down further says the art of poetry, maker of songs.
Oh, yeah.
Commander, contriver, plotter.
Yeah, that's another meaning of that word. I forgot about that. I mean, I'm just looking up in one more dictionary here to see if there's something else that comes up. Tectone, a worker in wood, a begetter. I'm not sure what that means. Anyway, so that his neighbors or whoever in Nazareth just were kind of amazed at him. And it seems because they couldn't understand what he was doing or why he had such a fame, they were upset at that. They took offense at that.
I think there was maybe some jealousy too.
That's probably very likely too.
I knew him when he was a little kid. Who does he think he is now?
Okay, I think that might be a good place to end for today's session. Are there any other comments on this? All right, great. We'll stop there and we'll start again where we left off next time. Okay, thank you, everyone. And,
Thank you. Appreciate it.
have a good evening.
Thank you, Henry.
Take care.
Bye now.
Take care,
You
everybody.
too.
God bless.
Good night.
Thanks. Good night.
Good night.
There is a great difference between comprehending the knowledge of things and tasting the hidden life of them. I fed on the sweetness of the former before finding the true manna of the latter.
This has been a podcast of Ohio Yearly Meeting of the Religious Society of Friends. It was hosted by Henry Jason and edited by Chip Thomas. Our music was from Paulette Meyer's CDs, which are Timeless Quaker Wisdom in Plainsong and Wellsprings of Life, Quaker Wisdom in Chant. These CDs are available at paulettemeyer.com.